Welcome everyone. Thank you for tuning in to the news report for day 348 on the war in Ukraine. You are listening to The Account. Today I have two extra segments. For once, we have an update on the Alexei Reznikov replacement situation and also an interview Reznikov gave today about the war. Additionally, Vadym Skibitsky released a statement on the current situation. The rest of the news updates are grouped into the usual situation inside Ukraine, including an update on President Zelensky's invitation to Brussels, the occupied territories, with a general update on issues surrounding the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, Russia and Belarus, and the international developments. However, as usual, we start with the flashpoints along the front. Dvorichne. Russia has gone on the offensive in the Berdiansk direction, trying to establish control over the bridgehead. Crimea. Russia has gone on the offensive here as well. Heavy battles are reported in all directions. So far, Russia does not have much success. Bakhmut. Russian forces continue to push into the northern and eastern suburbs. It seems Krasnohora remains under Ukrainian control despite Russian claims. Ukraine repelled attacks around Ivanivsk. The situation here is tense but under control for now. Vuhledar. Russia continues its attacks on the settlement without much success. It is noted that most attacks are small-scaled and it seems Russia is currently not willing to risk a major attack. Ukraine claimed that up to 30 armored vehicles were damaged or destroyed during attempted assaults. Moving on to the updates on Ukrainian Defense Minister Alexei Reznikov's situation. Yesterday, David Arahaima, head of the Servant of the People parliamentary faction, confirmed that Chief of the Defense Intelligence of Ukraine, Kirill Budanov, will replace Alexei Reznikov as head of the Ministry of Defense. However, today he claimed that no changes will be made this week, except for the appointment of the heads of the Ministry of Internal Affairs and the Security Service of Ukraine. Reznikov also denied the claims that he was offered to head the Ministry for Strategic Industries and said he would refuse the job anyways. Additionally, Alexei Reznikov gave an interview to the Ukrainska Pravda today. It is a rather lengthy one and I will not be able to go over everything. Please check it out in detail if you are interested. Here are some key points discussed. Reznikov believes that the capture of Kyiv by the Russian military is an unrealistic scenario. The city of Kyiv had an unofficial population of 4 million. While some evacuated when the war started, those who remained are willing and ready to resist the Russian occupation. He asked, "How can you capture a city with a population of 3 million?" Reznikov further believes that the Russians will not try to capture all of Ukraine at the same time, as was the case at the beginning of the full-scale invasion, but they will conduct concentrated battles on specific fronts during the expected new offensive in February. He added that today Ukraine has an understanding of where and how many Russian troops are accumulated, and in particular, nothing extraordinary is currently observed in the Belarusian direction. Reznikov also said that the enlistment campaign in Ukraine is taking place within the framework of the constitution. He explained why conscription notices are handed out in public. If you are fit for military service, lived in Kyiv, then move to Uzhhorod, Lviv, Ternopil, Chernivtsi, or wherever you are now, then you have to get registered. And hardly anyone does this. Now for the statement by Vadym Skibitsky, deputy head of the Defense Intelligence of Ukraine. Vadym Skibitsky released a statement on the situation of the war in Ukraine. Since this is quite a lengthy statement, please check it out if you're interested in the details. Here are the main points. According to Skibitsky, it will take Russia 2 months to deploy military personnel. He claimed that Russia is planning to mobilize 500,000 soldiers in spring and summer of this year in order to support the war in Ukraine. Skibitsky went on to explain that Ukrainian intelligence is well aware of any movement of the Russian strategic rocket forces, as Ukraine is constantly monitoring them. Ukraine is also monitoring the Russian defense industry in order to trace supply lines and ultimately interrupt them. Skibitsky also states that Russia is awaiting a new batch of Shahed drones supplied from Iran. And now for a look at all the minor news out of Ukraine. The Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has submitted to the Verkhovna Rada 2 draft laws on the approval of his decrees to extend the terms of martial law and general mobilization in the country. The Verkhovna Rada has recognized the Russian Wagner PMC as an international criminal organization. Charles Michel, President of the European Council, has officially invited Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky to take part in the summit of the leaders of the member states this week. Deb Rice, Special Advisor to the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine Valery Zaluzhny, has called on Western countries to supply Ukraine with cluster munitions and ATACMS in order for Ukraine to gain an advantage in the war of attrition, which is currently at a stalemate with artillery duels. President Volodymyr Zelensky announced in his evening address that it is planned to appoint officials with military experience as heads of the frontline regions. As a reminder, Ukraine is planning to replace the heads of Kyiv, Kherson, Sumy, Zaporizhzhia, and Dnipropetrovsk Oblast. According to Ukraine's Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba, Ukraine is working with its partners on setting up the first squadron of foreign fighter aircraft. Next up, the latest regarding the situation in the occupied territories. The National Resistance Center reports new cases of kidnappings among the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant workers who do not agree to sign contracts with a fake company from Rosatom, Russia's state nuclear regulator. Meanwhile, Enerhodar stated that Russia has brought workers from the Kalini nuclear power plant to the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. The mayor of occupied Enerhodar, the city next to the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, said that there currently is no warm water or heating in the city. 15,000 civilians are still living in Enerhodar. The mayor of Melitopol, Ivan Fedorov, reported about Russian forces conducting searches in home of teachers and confiscating their electronic devices to prevent remote education. Fedorov claimed that out of 2,900 employees of the education department in Melitopol, only 300 agreed to work with Russian authorities. According to OSINT analyst Brady Afric, Russia has constructed a fortified military base in northern Crimea. Analyzing satellite pictures, he was able to identify a fortified perimeter and a heliport. 3 explosions were heard in the temporarily occupied Berdiansk of the Zaporizhzhia region. 2 explosions were attributed to Russian anti-air systems, while the third one was described as achieved its goal. Ole Sinyuhubov, head of the Kharkiv Regional Military Administration, reports that Russia is massing heavy equipment in the Kupiansk direction. For now, it is suspected that Russia is strengthening its defenses. Moving on to the news updates from Russia and Belarus. Within 10 days, Russia may launch a new large-scale offensive led by elite units. This was reported to the Financial Times by an advisor to the Ukrainian army. Meanwhile, Serhiy Haidai, head of the Luhansk Oblast Military Administration, reported that a Russian offensive can be expected any day after February 15th. Patriarch Kirill, the head of the Russian Orthodox Church, used to work in Geneva for the Soviet KGB Foreign Intelligence Service in the 1970s. According to reports, the file on Kirill, which was compiled by the federal police at the time and later made public, confirms that the church leader belonged to the KGB. Recruiters from the Wagner PMC have begun to arrive in Russian penal colonies for the second time, revisiting the same locations where they previously recruited inmates to fight in Ukraine. However, the fanfare of the first round is no longer there. The prisoners are no longer lined up at the parade grounds, and Yevgeny Prigozhin, the Wagner Group's founder, does not fly in by helicopter. This is not war-related, but I found it still a strangely interesting report. Police in Moscow arrested a drunk man who tried to break into the mausoleum of Vladimir Lenin in central Moscow and tried to steal his body. The Dmitry Donskoy, the last Typhoon-class submarine, is said to be decommissioned. The Typhoon-class were the largest submarines ever built and served as the inspiration for the famous fictional Red October submarine. European managers are helping friends of Vladimir Putin to circumvent sanctions, it is claimed. Gennady Timchenko and Arkady Rottenberg, the Russian oligarchs close to Putin, are hiding their assets from the European authorities, and certain EU managers are helping them with this. And to wrap up the news segment, the international developments. The first Leopard 2 main battle tank that Canada has donated to Ukraine has arrived in Poland. The Canadian Minister of Defense Anita Anand shared the relevant news and photos on Twitter. The UK Ministry of Defense has said that the Ukrainian military has arrived in the country to train on the AS-90 armored self-propelled artillery guns. Norwegian Prime Minister Jonas Gahr Støre said that Norway aims to provide Ukraine with $7.3 billion over the next 5 years. However, the Norwegian parliament has to ratify the aid package first. And now for the intelligence report segment, starting with the UK Ministry of Defense. On February 1, 2023, Russian Federation Council Chair Valentina Matvienko said that regional elections will take place in the newly annexed areas of Ukraine on September 10, 2023. Incorporating the elections into same day of voting, which is scheduled across Russia, highlights the leadership's ambition to present the areas as integral parts of the federation. This follows continued efforts to Russify the occupied areas, which include revision of the education, communication, and transport systems. While meaningful democratic choices are no longer available to voters at even regional level elections in Russia, leaders will likely make the self-vindicating argument that new elections further justify the occupation. A look at the latest assessment by the Institute for the Study of War. Today's assessment focuses on Vladimir Putin and his decisions about the war in Ukraine. I will simply summarize the main arguments. Russian President Vladimir Putin's decision regarding Ukraine since his initial flawed invasion on February 24, 2022, indicate a likely disconnect between his maximalist objectives and his willingness to take the likely high-risk decisions necessary to achieve them. Putin has consistently ignored, delayed, or only partially implemented several likely necessary pragmatic decisions concerning his invasion. Putin continued to select comparatively less risky options, even when faced with spiraling military failures in fall 2022. The Institute assesses the Kremlin and Russian Ministry of Defense is belatedly implementing large-scale military reforms and treating Ukraine as a protracted and major war. Yet Putin is continuing a similar pattern of reserved decision-making. Putin notably relies on a group of scapegoats to publicly take risks in his place and shoulder the blame for Russian military failures and unpopular policies. Putin's reluctance to take risks directly related to his conventional war in Ukraine indicates that he remains highly unlikely to pursue nuclear escalation or war with NATO. And to wrap up the report, the evening update by the General Staff of Ukraine. The enemy continues measures for forced passporting of the population in the temporarily occupied territories. For example, in the city of Crimea, Luhansk region, employees of the so-called state enterprises of the LPR who are not in the queue to receive a Russian passport have their salaries reduced by 30%. In the temporarily occupied territories of the Kherson region, the occupiers are intensifying filtering measures. Employees of the FSB of the Russian Federation arrived in Novotroitsk to conduct inspections of the local population with pro-Ukrainian position. In order to replenish the losses in manpower, in addition to mobilization, the occupiers also carry out propaganda and agitation work among the youth. Thus, cadet classes with enhanced military training are being created in schools of the Skibitskyi district of the Kherson region. The Russian invaders promise that the graduates of these classes will allegedly be given benefits when entering contract military service in the form of appointment to sergeant positions. And with that, today's news report is finished. Should you be interested in any of the articles I mentioned, I included links to them in the description as usual. Thank you for tuning in and have a great day. You were listening to The Account. Slava Ukraini!